Carthage must be destroyed. Today on this channel we are going to be finishing the break test section of the Hail Caesar walkthrough that we've been doing on the rulebook. First of all, I apologize if there's some background noises. It is so hot in my apartment. I'm leaving windows open, so if you hear a lot of background noise in cars, I apologize for that. But hopefully this is still clear. We are going to get right into the thick of things here. We left off talking about supporting units and what they do, as well as the uphill advantage in the last video. We're going to continue on with the supporting units and victorious units here. So victorious units get to do a number of things when they win. Well, it's not too many things, but they are able to have some choices. So we talked about how break tests happen and you determine if there's a winner or a loser. And if you are the winner of the combat, if your unit is the victorious unit, they have some choices they can make. I'm going to bring these units here together. We've got some Sam Knights here and some lighter Sam Knights supporting these frontline Sam Knights here. They're medium troops. There's 2 units of Hastati and there's a Triarii group supporting one of the Hastati units here. Now, let's assume that these guys here have a big old combat and the Romans win, and in the process, we discover that, okay, the Romans have won, and following the break test results, we see that the Sam Knights with their supports have to give ground in good order. So they move back 6 inches. The Romans have won. The Romans are the victorious unit here. Now, the Romans have some choices they can make. If they were a single unit or even individual units, well, in this case, there's 2 units here, so we have 2 victorious units. But if it was a single unit, it'd only be 1, obviously, right? But these guys have some choices here. They've won the combat, and they're able to make special moves. They can decide to sit there. If these units decide, we've won, but we're not going to pursue, we're just going to sit here, the engagement is off and does not continue. Every side will be out of the engagement, and there won't be any more engagement to follow. But usually what happens is when someone gives ground and a unit is winning, the choice that most victorious units are going to end up making is to follow the enemy. They're going to pursue the unit that gave ground, and the fight will continue on. The pursuers, or the people who have won the combat, get +1 in the next round of combat because they are victorious, they're winning. So victorious units have +1 to their hit values. One thing to remember when you are moving victorious units, that proximity still applies. So say that you decided to not follow for whatever reason. Maybe you guys are really weak and you don't want to keep the fighting up. Maybe they sit back here. As long as there's 12 inches between these units and to the front of this center units here, they would still have to follow proximity. If they wanted to move in a later round, they could only move forward or backwards. So moves by victorious units are always bound by proximity. There could also be the case that maybe, they don't always move. Sometimes there's a draw, and then in that case, they just, nobody has +1 to anything. It's a draw, and the fight continues on. But there may be a case that, let's say, the Romans have forced these guys to give ground, all right? Victorious moves come when you have given ground, or when you cause an enemy to give ground. The other way would be if you destroy the enemy. Let's say that the Romans either break these guys, or if they outright shatter them, then the Romans have a choice on a victorious move. Now, you do the victorious move after these guys do the break test. So these guys would test to break. Let's say that they survive and they give ground here. Now, the proximity rule, as I said, is still in play here. They're 12 inches away. But the Romans could decide to still advance forward. And in that case, a number of things could be decided on what they want to do. Okay, I just had to wait for a siren to go by. But yeah, one of the victorious moves you can do, other than just move once in any direction following proximity, these guys could move back 6 inches if they wanted to. They get a free move if they want. The other thing they can do is that they can do a sweeping advance. Now, a sweeping advance is kind of a bonus for destroying or breaking an enemy. Like that example I had here, I put these Sam Knights here because I'm going to show you something, but if these Sam Knights were destroyed earlier by these Romans here, both of these small units are victorious, they could choose to do a sweeping advance. Now, we had a unit of small light infantrymen supporting that unit that gave ground as a result of this unit breaking. But what the Romans can do is they want to declare, we're going to do a sweeping advance. There's 2 types of sweeping advances, or sweeping moves. The sweeping advance is when you move 2 moves forward, and it's always forward, it's not backwards, obviously, it's advance. Or the other one is a sweeping charge. A sweeping charge is basically where you're allowed to make 2 moves and charge into either a fresh enemy, or alternatively, you could charge into a unit that was supporting a previous unit you defeated. In that case, they count as charging, and then the combat starts right away. A new engagement starts up. These guys will have +1 for charging, and this is a second unit here that was also victorious. They could also potentially use their sweeping advance to just fly by these guys and charge into the guys behind them there if there was another unit there. They could also opt not to do a sweeping advance. They could say, okay, we're just going to use our victorious move to move up and support this unit. You have a few choices here, I think. So yeah, that is a sweeping advance. When you do a sweeping advance, be it an advance or a charge, you have to roll on a single die, and you have to roll to see if your unit becomes disordered. Sweeping advance is 2 moves forward, but there's a chance on a 4, 5, and 6 that they become disordered. In this case here, I rolled a 5, which means that this unit here, charging up in the sweeping charge, would actually have a -1 to their fighting now, but they'd also get a +1 to charge. So they become disordered in the charge, and that +1 bonus to charging is kind of negated by the disorder. And remember, disorder won't wear as long as they're engaged. So you get kind of a risk factor here going when you want to charge. You might be disordered or you might not be, depending on how they move. Now, let us say that these guys here decide to also sweep, and they go for the straight, they fly back there, hit the enemy behind them, because that's what's blocking their proximity right there. The support units, like we said in the last video, always follow what the victorious unit is going to do. It also follows what the losing unit is going to do. Whatever unit it's supporting, it follows it until that unit is broken or is destroyed. So if these guys sweep up, they would have to test if they did a sweeping charge. They rolled a 4, so they're going to be disordered, but they still go in and charge. And the support would follow. The support don't have to do any tests, but the support would follow and continue charging them. So the support will always follow the unit it's helping out until the engagements are completely broken off. Okay? I'll show you guys another example here. Here we've got more of a long battle line with Hastati fighting some light guys, and then a single unit fighting 2 units here. You can also use the sweeping advance in a clever way. It's 2 moves forward. If, say, this unit was destroyed or they broke, and remember, to do a sweeping advance, you have to break or destroy. Let's say that these guys broke. If you're along another enemy here or a friend, you can actually use your 2 moves to sweep into the flank of another unit. Because it's 2 moves forward, you could move something like this, and then that'd be your move as long as you get the center front to the flank and charge in on the flank. A lot of people do this on a sweeping advance. If they have the room to do so, they'll sweep up and do a flank, and that's a kind of a way you can crush the enemy's line if you got a long battle line here. You just have to have the room to do it. And when you do that, of course, you have to test to see if you fail the disorder test. And of course, they do, and they're -1 on their charge, despite being able to charge. Now that was one unit doing their victorious move. These guys back here can do a victorious move, but there's nothing really to sweep. They could decide if they wanted to just sweep up like that. They'd have to test though if they're disordered. But they might also just want to do this, You don't have to sweep. You can just do a single move without any in any direction, as long as proximity is followed. You can do a single move and don't have to just charge forward if you don't want to. Then there's no test involved. In regards to the sweeping advance, I should also mention, if your unit is disordered or shaken when you want to do a sweeping advance, and what I mean by that is if they are already disordered and shaken before the sweeping advance, they simply can't do a sweeping advance, okay? A unit can only do a sweeping advance if it is not disordered and not shaken. It may become disordered while doing the sweeping advance, and if it does, it just continues on into the next combat disordered, but it has to be not disordered or not shaken before that sweeping advance is made. Something else I should clear up here too. If these units were just fighting normally, and both units here are shaken or disordered, let's say this unit is disordered and this unit is shaken, it doesn't really matter. Let's say the Romans are both disordered and shaken, and they win, and they push these guys back. Even though these guys are disordered or shaken, as a victorious move response, they can still follow up. Okay, the only thing they wouldn't be able to do is a sweeping advance if they destroy them. You can continue following up in a combat despite being disordered and shaken, as long as it's the same engagement. If these guys were, say, destroyed, and then there's another light infantry unit behind it, and these guys were shaken or disordered, they could not sweep. Their victorious move here, they could move back, which would probably be the wise thing to do if they're shaken, or they could just sit there. Because there's no more engagement after that, though, they wouldn't be able to charge if they're shaken, because in order to charge or do anything, you need an order. Shaken units can't take orders to advance towards fresh units. They can only move away if they're shaken, and if they're disordered, they just can't take orders at all. So I hope that's clear on the sweeping advance and the victorious moves by units. You might also have some weird situations like this, and this is called a incidental contact, and I'll show you an example here. You might have a situation where you have two formed units fighting another unit. Maybe it's an open order skirmish unit like I've done here, and let's say that the open order skirmishers here lose and they have to give ground as a result. They most likely will break if they're straight up skirmishers, but if they're light infantry in open order, they have a higher chance to not just up and break. But let's say that they have to give ground and the Romans decide to pursue them. They're 6 inches. But something happens here when the support's following them, because the support follows the victorious unit. They can't fully make it into support because there is an enemy here blocking their movement forward to support. So what happens here is that this Roman unit has lost its support. Probably doesn't need it against light infantry. And now these guys have, they can't pass by to support because you've got a guy here in this other enemy unit blocking them. Now, are these guys fighting? No, because this center front is not touching an enemy, and this center front's not touching an enemy. So they're kind of up in each other's faces, but can't complete the move on the Romans' part. The rulebook here says that if you have an incidental contact like this, you basically just, even if you win or draw a combat, the people that move forth, the folks that have moved forth, or the unit that moved forth to follow the unit, in this case it would have been a supporting unit, they just move 6 inches back. It doesn't matter if you won or drew a combat or what's happening. There's an incidental combat like that. You just move back 6 inches, so there's room later for one unit to charge or get in. It's kind of like they back off because they're kind of in a precarious situation there. The rules also state something about sometimes a unit in incidental contact, like a medium or heavy artillery piece or a baggage piece might be there. Instead of going back, if it's like a minor unit like that, that unit just destroy it as if it was killed, because they're not really going to prevent the movement or halt the movement through an incidental contact. They're just too small to be worried about. So depending on the unit, I would check the rule book out on how it works. To be honest, I don't have many incidental contacts in our games. Just remember though that if these guys moved forward in a way that gets their center front in there, it becomes a combat. As we discussed before, they may not have charged. It just goes on to like a normal combat, so there'd be no +1. But if it was something like I pointed out here earlier, where center fronts don't touch, the unit that moved would just be going back 6 inches, and they just separate like that. And I mean, don't be too picky. Like if it's like a centimeter blocking it, just push the unit over. The rule books even say that. Don't be too terribly picky. I might argue with someone if there's like a unit and a half, or a single model and a half here like that blocking it. But if it's something like minuscule like this, just let it go. You don't need to be too picky. Just let them go by and continue the support if that's the case. So there's coming to the end of this chapter on break tests, there's units in open order. Now, units in open order, they, after a combat has ended from combat results, if the combat ends after break tests and the unit's in open order, remember how they kind of close up a bit? They don't become close ranks, but you kind of push them together from previous videos. You just take them out of their closed up position and put them back into open order. So say these guys somehow drove off these Romans and they were clumped up like that to fight, you just put them back in like a 1-inch separation to represent their open order. They never actually formed up in a battle line to fight, but they did kind of close up just so if there is a flank or a rear charge, it's just easier to maintain it. Now here's my quickly put together square formation. Squares in a break test are kind of scary because if they lose or if they win, it doesn't matter. The square is going to stay as a square. So any break test from shooting that's a retreat, or any break test result that is give ground from melee, they just ignore. Instead, it's hold the ground. They can still be disordered, so if they roll something like give ground disordered, they don't give ground disordered, they hold ground disordered, so they can be affected by disorder still. But basically, if a square is a square, they are not moving, they're not giving ground, they're not retreating, and to defeat them in a break test, you're going to have them roll the break result, or you're going to have to inflict enough wounds on that particular unit that they shatter. So a square unit, a unit that is in a square, has, if it can defend all attacks against it, it has a high probability just to stand there and never move. You could be fighting for rounds against a square, and as long as it doesn't roll a break test or you don't double the stamina value, it's sitting there, it's not moving anywhere. So squares are good, it can be a roadblock against some units, especially really heavy units. If medium units are fighting them or something. This also goes for units that are in buildings too. Units in the buildings are the same as squares. They ignore retreat and give ground. They can still become disordered if they're in a building, but they're not going to retreat or give ground if they're stuck in that building. They're going to fight on until they either break or if they're shattered. And I don't have the buildings to really represent this, but say that you defeat the enemy, you shatter or break the enemy in the building. The victorious move could be to, of course, march away from the building backwards or move to the side or something, as long as proximity allows it. Or the victorious move could be occupy the building. In that case, you just put your unit in the building and they automatically take up the combat position and maybe hold that building or wait for another enemy to come by. So the victorious move into a building after breaking or shattering a unit in a building could just be to take the building and position yourself into a fighting move. So if any enemy comes, you think they'd be fighting you in the building. Something interesting, if the unit that was fighting if there was a unit that won against enemies in a building and they had supports, the supports in this situation don't have to follow them into the building. They can actually make their own little victorious move. So it's kind of a little bonus. If you defeat an enemy in a building and you had supports to help you, the fighting unit that defeated the enemy building, they could choose to take up position in that building as a victorious move, while their supports can do whatever they kind of want, go whatever position they want to, as long as it's not to occupy the building with the victorious unit. That's the only exception. Another thing I forgot to mention is that a sweeping charge is also considered a charge. So if you do a sweeping charge against an enemy, pretend those Triarii are an enemy. If they do a sweeping charge, an enemy is able to react accordingly, like a normal charge. So they had bows, longbows, a long-range weapon, they could respond. If they were cavalry, they could evade. So a sweeping charge still counts as a charge, and if the unit they're charging is able to respond to a charge normally, then they would respond. That is everything for the break tests and the results. We have to look at what commanders can do in the next video, and we also have to finish this walkthrough by looking at, I'll just open it because I forget the name, victory and defeat. How to determine if your army is victorious, if it's destroyed, what happens to divisions and stuff. So not a whole lot left. All the, I would say, the more complex stuff is done. From now on, it is going to be a smooth ride, I think. So thank you all for watching, and we will continue working on this series. If you have any questions or something wasn't clear, please leave a comment in the section below, and just like and subscribe to this channel. We'll keep making content for this video, our video channel on YouTube. Thank you for watching. I hope to do some unboxings again soon after this Hail Caesar stuff. So, all right, thank you and goodbye.